Welcome back to the WSU Democrats podcast. My name is Ethan Bishop. I'm the president of the organization, and today we have a very special guest, Bianca, who I'll allow to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thank y'all for having me. I'm Bianca Mittendorf. I'm a candidate for House District 7, which covers part of North Ogden. So I'm very excited to be here with you all.
Awesome. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Vaughn. I'm the vice president.
And I'm Alexandria, the Women's Committee Chair.
All right, so my first question for you is, what's your story? What kind of got you into politics, and what inspired your desire to run for office?
Okay, cool. This is rad. Let's get it going. So I think, not I think, I know what inspired me to get into politics was just a very intense level of discontent with not having an actual choice when it came to electing a representative. I can recall year after year filling out the ballot and noticing that the same names are kind of showing up, on the ballot unopposed. And I believe in a thriving and a strong democracy, voters should have a choice. And so I didn't really think too much of it. I kind of assumed, okay, somebody will step up. And then November 5th, 2024 happened, and it was like something awakened in me, and I was like, I can't wait any longer because no one's coming to save us. I am my own superwoman, so I'm going to get out there and run. So that's why I decided to run.
That's amazing. I mean, a lot of the time, the moment where a lot of people got into politics was 2016, but
Yeah, it took me a
2024.
minute. But I'm here.
Yeah. And I didn't mean it like
No,
that.
I know.
But the 2024 election, I think, was particularly terrible as well because you had just such a qualified woman who had, every capability of being just this great president, and then we get that snatched away from us for Trump. But yeah, do you guys have a question, and then I can go into another one of my questions?
I can ask mine later. Just
I can wait for a couple until
Okay.
we really get into it.
Yeah.
So for this one, there's been a lot of concern recently about ICE, particularly because of the $145 million warehouse that's just been purchased in Salt Lake City for the detainment and deportation of people who we consider our neighbors. What do you make of ICE, and do you think there's anything we can do about ICE on the state level?
Well, I certainly believe that ICE is operating like a secret police force that is being activated kind of on the whim of the president, right? And it almost seems like they're being allowed to operate beyond what we would consider, quote unquote, like normal jurisdictions. And they have to, they're able to wear masks and conceal their identities, and just a lot of allowances being made that are trampling on the civil rights of human beings, right? And so concerning is not the word for it. It's like a 5-alarm fire, like all hands on deck. We have to get in front of this now because it's only going to get worse. And I believe at the state level, there is action that can be taken. I think at the bare minimum, there can be assurances given by our state legislature, by our elected officials, that one, they recognize the harm ICE is causing. Whatever the stated purpose of ICE is, I believe we've gone so far beyond that. We have to consider and look at the actual harm. And then I also think making sure that there is safety, not just a sense of safety, but actual perceived and real safety for these individuals who are finding themselves in the crosshairs of ICE, right? And it's not, the common argument we hear is, well, don't come here illegally or whatever. And we are finding it's not that, right? It's almost like just don't be a different color, or just don't look foreign or something, right? And there needs to be something done, and that has to start with our elected officials at a minimum. And to be clear, like a resolution or something is the bare minimum. I think not cooperating or working with ICE or doing everything that we can to get in the way of this entity that is disappearing folks is necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great response. So Utah is a conservative state, but there are also a lot of people who feel the legislature doesn't reflect where the public actually is on issues like abortion, democracy, affordability, or like ICE, as we're talking about. Um, how would you make a persuasive case for democratic ideas in a district where some voters may be skeptical of the party label?
That's a really great question because that's, what I'm trying to do here. And I think, I keep saying I think, I don't think, I know. The biggest thing is we are currently right now in a state where we are experiencing the effects of having a supermajority. So they've been allowed to kind of run amok, and they're making all kinds of rules about things that nobody asked for. These aren't real problems. These are fabricated problems. These are issues that they said are problems, and they're offering these solutions that aren't even solving anything, but are rather creating hindrances in all of our lives. And so my appeal to voters who have, who struggle with voting for someone with a D after the name is, I would ask, is your life better that we have, because we have a supermajority in our state legislature? Like, can you quantifiably say that your life and your quality of being is better? And if the question is no, then I think there's some room for having some, differences of opinion. A healthy democracy thrives on multiple voices, dissenting opinions, being able to kind of have a forum, to so to speak, but an opportunity to represent the actual will of all the people, not just a small percentage. And we are so lacking that. And so I would ask folks to, look beyond that D and look what you could be gaining. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, to where even people who would typically vote for Republicans, you'd say, well, look at the Republican state legislature. It's basically an echo chamber is what I call it.
Right.
Because it's just all the same ideas just bouncing back and forth to one another. And then any Democrat who brings up anything, it's just gavelled down.
Right.
So even if someone is mostly conservative or is a Republican, they can still recognize that a diversity of ideas is important. And free thinkers are people who aren't just going to, vote on party line, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. They do what they believe is right.
Right.
I think that's just so effective.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, and Bianca, you mentioned your strategy for sort of bringing typically moderate or conservative voters into your camp. I wonder how then would you, in the state house, work to bring conservative, Republican, moderate members of the legislature into supporting issues that shouldn't be partisan, like protecting women's rights to reproductive care, protecting trans people's rights to gender affirming care. Like, what would be your strategies in the state house itself to sort of bridge those gaps between things that are sort of basic human dignity issues that have then become made
Politicized.
partisan?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. And I feel that this is all the more reason why we have to break the supermajority. Like, I'm but one part of that. I think the more we can elect folks who are not moving in lockstep with whatever, the supermajority is saying, but are willing to push against that, I think that is, that's key. So having a multitude of voices kind of singing that same tune. And, as for me personally, I'm very much someone who is motivated, moved, called to action by her own, my personal moral compass. And that, I use that to guide me. And so and I also believe that I would not be doing not just the voters of House District 7, but the state of Utah any justice if I'm just kind of going along with things that are really unjust, right? And that we have to do mental gymnastics to try to convince ourselves like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is a new normal. So where I am able to, but also fully recognizing that I am but one person up against, the machine. I think as much as possible, remembering, like where I stand on issues and pushing where necessary in order to make sure, however little, we are continuing to make some ground.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And just to focus on breaking up the supermajority as well, because just like Barack Obama, he classified the Republican Party as the party of no, because they, after they won the House in the 2010 midterms, they didn't allow him to do anything. So as far as Democrats trying to get anything done in the legislature or whatever, you're going to run into people who are just going to say no, no matter what you do. So,
Right.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Vaughn, did you have a question?
Yeah, just wanted to kind of turn it towards education. So, given your background in education, what special insight can you provide to the state legislature? I imagine that the education portion of the big beautiful bill probably hit close to home with all those education cuts, those budget cuts. So, yeah, what insight can you provide just given your educational background?
Another great question. And before I go on, I'd be really remiss if I didn't give a shout out to public educators, because they are seriously holding it down and kind of standing the line when it comes to preserving our democracy, right? But I feel I've had the opportunity to work in public education as a special education teacher, and then at the district level as a Title IX coordinator. And now I work for the Utah Education Association, the largest teachers union in Utah, supporting educators across our members across the state. And one of the things that I believe that I'm able or would be able to provide in the State House is a perspective and a real perspective on, this is actually what this looks like in the classroom. I think a lot of times we have elected officials who are making policies about issues because they've had a constituent raise a concern, which is very valid. But then it's like, well, did we go back and ask the folks who are actually going to be implementing this on the front lines, like what this does in terms of their work? What resources do they need? Does that mean more funding or more people or more whatever it may be? And so being able to strategize around and think in real time what that may look like, that's an insight I'm able to bring, as well as being open and willing to collaborate when I don't have all the answers, because I'll admit, it's been a minute since I've been in the classroom. Things have vastly changed, right? Since COVID, teaching's a whole new game. And so being able to lean on and call on folks who I know are excellent educators, and asking for their guidance, counsel, just getting feedback on before making decisions that are going to implement folks, I think would probably be my key thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm all for getting new politicians with different backgrounds in education or healthcare, whatever it might be, and that don't just have experience in politics, because they're making the decisions and you don't really have any voices in the room of how that, like you said, how that's going to actually affect the classroom, for example. So I think that'll be very, very important, especially because I think education is very much at the top of the list for important issues, especially with the budget cuts now. I think uninformed and less intelligent society is just the downfall of a country. So yeah, I think that having that experience in the House will be very crucial.
Yeah, and I also think too, like, it's so important because that, I had an awesome thought and then it poofed away. Okay, let's continue. It'll come
Yeah.
back.
I was wondering as to what sort of, because Utah up until I want to say the 80s or 90s was a swing state largely. What would be sort of your strategy in sort of getting the perhaps more religious groups in Utah to like sort of put certain maybe prejudices and biases down to say, hey, no, these are the things that we agree on. Like what, for example, like, I mean, this is a, fairly liberal room. What would be your sort of pitch to more moderate or conservative rooms to say, hey, we're going to disagree on some things, but these are the fundamentals on which we do agree? What would be sort of your pitch to, conservatives listening?
Yeah, so I really do feel we are living in a time where we are being made to believe that there is more that divides us than actually brings us together. And we're being made to see that there are these big chasms of differences amongst us as Americans, which, don't get me wrong, there are very real people are living different experiences that are created in part by the system under which we're all living, right? But I feel some of that is also being helped along, if you will, by folks in power who it is to their benefit to not have the masses coming together. Because we see what happens when people come together and people lean into their power. Things change and they demand more. And so for me, I feel that I always approach it doesn't matter the space I'm in. I know that I have values that are going to connect with that audience that, we can find some common ground on. And it could be at its most basic element. Sometimes it's just different facets of like the same core value that, each side may be looking at. But my whole thing at that point would be then to just really drive home, like we have inherent power. And when we tap into that power, we can create some true, meaningful, lasting change. We don't have to accept the status quo. We don't have to accept this line that we've been given about, well, there's not enough money. Okay, well, there seems to be enough money for, any number of pet projects that, our state legislature wants to pass, right? So it's just when it pertains to folks who might be, working class or however we want to put it, or otherwise marginalized, all of a sudden, we can't make it happen. And so my appeal to values would lean heavily into recognizing that inherent power we have, especially collective power. I'm a unionist at heart, and so I believe in the power of, like, when we come together, unstoppable, right? And so people just have to be reminded of that. I think we know that on a certain level, but we've been sold these stories of, to try to remove us from that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, it's all about, the bottom versus the top, really. It's not about right versus left. And I think when we tap into that with these
Exactly.
voters who are working class, lower class, all that kind of thing where they are marginalized, they haven't had the best opportunities in life a lot of the time, where you kind of just tell them, we're actually trying to help you. Like, we're trying to expand healthcare. We're trying to expand your freedom. We're trying to create economic opportunities for you and make housing more affordable, for example, which brings me to the next question. So housing is one of the biggest pressure points in Utah right now. What should the state legislature be doing differently to increase housing supply, lower barriers to building, and help working people actually afford to live in places like House District 7?
Well, one of the things I, think about with that is, so like in my district, North Ogden, for example, is facing a really interesting kind of situation that it's in because it is trying to keep up with mandates that dictate, like from the state, how certain zoning and whatnot, right? To allow for more residential use. But unfortunately, all of this building is happening very rapidly, and there's not enough infrastructure to support it. The water system is taxed. There's, the roads need help, and there's not enough funding coming from the state to help support the district in being able to keep up with these mandates, right? And so really, I think one of the easiest things, maybe easiest is not the appropriate word, but one of the first things the state legislature could be doing is really examining, we have all of these different mechanisms in place to try to give back funding to municipalities to help them maintain their roads, whether it's, part of a tax on fuel or whatever it is, but really re-examine how those funds are allocated to make sure it is continuing to support the strain of the, additional housing, additional residents on the different localities. That would be, kind of one thing. I'll stop there because that's the main thing. That's the key.
That's a good point because a lot of people will just be like, oh, just build more housing. But that's a good point that if you build more housing and you don't have the right infrastructure in place, that can create real issues.
Right. Like, and it's just, and it taxes the system and it creates this domino effect where, like, for example, if all of the secondary water is allocated, then that means, cities have to start looking at their like culinary water. And so there's an impact on our water conservation, and where we didn't have the snowpack we thought we were going to have. Like, this is a huge issue. So all of these ideas, it's not just, just housing, or just like the Great Salt Lake and water conservation and all of that. Like, they are all very much interconnected. So yeah, try to present it in that way so folks realize that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, with housing, with the Great Salt Lake, with the things we do that accelerate climate change, I mean, it's all intertwined. So a lot of younger Utahns care deeply about democracy, rights, and affordability, but feel like the system is stacked against them or just doesn't listen. What would you want young voters, students, and first-time voters in Utah to hear from you about why state politics still matters?
The first thing I would say is the minute you lose hope, or the minute you say like, well, my vote doesn't matter, they won. Like, just pack it up, go home because they won. And that's what they want. They want us to all feel disenfranchised and like, well, my vote doesn't matter, so I might as well not vote because that's how they win. But what I would say to young folks is that's all the more reason to get out and vote, because you do have a voice and it does matter. And you have to critically look at like what is happening around us and see how folks are moving to recognize like, oh, okay, like I am a part of an important voting block. You know what I mean? There's a reason why myself as a candidate, I'm like, I need to come talk to these Weber State University Dems because they need to themselves and, their followers need to hear this message because you are powerful. There is power there. And I think it's very easy to feel hopeless and just, kind of time and time again, you get you get tired of getting like your heart broken,
Yeah.
I guess. Like it gets real tough. But James Baldwin says, or said, I love America so much. And so I reserve the right to criticize her constantly. And I really think that's kind of the mentality that we all should have as Americans. Like, don't give up. Like, get in it and demand more.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's especially important for this under this administration, because you have Trump silencing voices, late night shows with the FCC, weaponizing the FCC. So yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean you hate America or you love it any less. You want it to be the best that it can be, and that means calling out what's wrong and what needs to be changed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what that is.
And it was either Valerie Kaur, I think it was Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks describes love as being, love for a community, specifically
Come
being.
on now. Bell hooks. Here we go.
Oh yeah, she describes. Well, she's actually quoting someone else, but she was applying it from interpersonal to community relationships as being the space to allow for spiritual growth. Right? How would you, in your love for the community, sort of allow for the spiritual growth or make room for the spiritual growth of Utah as a public figure? Not so much legislatively, but like what is the sort of culture of growth that you would sort of bring to Utah?
So and to answer that question, I really think it's kind of grounded in this idea of love, like you said, right? And so it's moving in this space of recognizing that love not as a noun, but as an action, and really recognizing Utah has a lot of potential. Okay. There's a reason why, my family, my partner and I decided to raise our kids here. Because this is a really great place. But I do think that Utah needs space, I think, to make mistakes and to also be willing to kind of look at, okay, maybe that wasn't the right the right move there. Maybe we need to make amends with this community, that maybe we've completely offended, if not worse, right? So that's a really broad kind of answer to that question. All to say, like, grounded in love as the action, right? So
Let's see here. Okay. Should be the last question here. If you win, what are the top 2 or 3 things you'd want to fight for immediately in the legislature for House District 7 specifically? And how do those connect to bigger statewide fights over, say, affordability, freedom, or democracy?
Awesome. Really great question. So one of the first immediate key things is there is there's a wave of like townhomes or like multifamily like apartments coming into North Ogden. And so my thoughts are, is it possible for folks to like just own a little bit, like own that, like rather than it being like a rented, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we're in this time where everything is rented, everything is a subscription. You're not allowed to own anything anymore. And so that would be one of the things I'd want to look at, because it's definitely impacting the city, but more on the looking at it from the perspective of, okay, we're going to have more folks coming in. We've experienced some growth. how can we ensure that the folks who are coming can be set up so that they can own their home or whatever that may look like for them, and not have to just be kind of, okay, here's an apartment for you. And I get, land is more expensive now. And so you talk to like any realtor and they'll tell you like, well, what you could get before you can't get now. So that's why we're seeing, everything so, so dense. But just wanting to look at more like how can we support folks who are wanting home ownership. And then the second thing, there are a lot of working families in North Ogden, and in the district actually. And I don't know if you've ever kind of been up that way. There aren't a lot of childcare centers. Pretty much like there's a couple, that I'm thinking of, and a couple in home. But lack of adequate childcare is it's a big concern. It impacts women most disproportionately, because it's often women who need to figure out what to do with kids if there's no adequate childcare. And so I'd be very interested in looking at what could a model for sustainable childcare look like in that area, to support our working families, so that they're not having to spend as much as a month's rent on childcare, and that childcare is available when they need it so that they can work. Those would be kind of my two biggest things, I would say.
Awesome.
Well, yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
WSC Democrats podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe, everybody. Make sure to support Bianca's campaign. Should have a link for that in a pinned comment. And yeah, have a nice day or night, everybody. See you later.